Hello everybody and welcome back to the Dovetail box series. In this video, we're going to flatten off the lid. Let's get going. Okay, so I've already taken the lid out the clamps and my lord, have we got a bit of a challenge today. This is going to be the perfect example as to how to flatten and size this thing in order to be accurate. Look at this. It is not sitting flat whatsoever. What we've got going on with this lid is there is a little bit of a twist going on with it. Now that could be down to a number of things. It could be that perhaps I didn't line up one of these faces quite as accurately as I should have. The other one might be that the clamps possibly would have been putting some weird pressure on it. Remember in the previous episode when I used the parallel jaw clamps, I clamped them at the top, whereas with parallel jaws you want to clamp those towards the bar. Whereas if you're using sash clamps, you want to clamp it so that it's in line with the threads on the sash clamps in order to prevent this kind of thing from happening. I think seeing as I used the parallel jaws incorrectly as a demonstration purpose, it's done this. And as much as I was tempted to remake and redo one of these without telling you guys, I think this will be a very good example as to what can go wrong at the extreme end of the scale and how to fix it. So what we'll do is address the bottom of the lid to begin with, because that is going to be the face that sits flat on the box, or at least we hope so. So if we look at this, it's rocking corner to corner this way, which means I need to take material off the opposite corners here and here in order to make those sit flat on the workbench. A lot of people, when they do this, they'll rock it like that and think, cool, right, I need to take material off that bit that's rocking and that bit that's rocking. No, that is going to make the problem even worse. So in order to plane this lid flat, I'm going to be using the tail vise that's built into my workbench because it is ideal for situations like this. I'm very much aware that a lot of people don't have access to a tail vise. So as an alternative, you could use this thing, which is called a Wonder Pup. You can also get a Wonder Dog, which has a slightly longer stem if you're working on a thicker workbench. And these things can be retrofitted to any surface that you're happy to drill a hole in. And these basically work like a portable tail vise. You drill a hole there, you drill a hole at the other side, and then that goes in there and you tighten this up. And then there you go. That is the lid locked in place. Now you can see with this, the disadvantage of the Wonder Dogs is that the height is fixed and they may sit above the surface you're working on, thus you won't be able to plane it flat very easily. So instead, just shift this back a hole and then clamp a thinner bit of material between here going up to the edge of the lid, and then you'll have lots of room around it in order to work on that surface. So I'll pop a link to these Wonder Pups and Wonder Dogs in the description and also in the supporting resources if you're watching this on the actual online school page on my website. However, if you don't have a surface that you're able to drill holes in order to accept these, there is a third way of securing wood on the surface of your workbench without having to drill any of these holes. And this will be done using a stop of some kind and also this notched batten, which is also known as a doe's foot if you're going for a, I don't know, I think it's the traditional name for it, I don't know. The batten at the back gets clamped down, yeah, nice advantage of a split top roubeau there. This goes against that stop and then this bit goes at the back like that. Now ideally you'll make this from a more durable material than OSB, but for demonstration purposes it should work fine. So the notch batten gets clamped all the way up here, and then what you can do with this lid is work diagonal, and that batten will lock it in against the stop here. You can obviously flip it round and work that way if you need to, and you can also plane the opposite way into the batten if you need to. This is a really good method of work holding without having clamps restricting access to the areas that you need to work on. And of course, ideally, you would make these from a material that is thinner than the lid that you're going to be working on. But anyway, I'm spoiled, so I'm going to use the tail vise. So just to recap, rocking corner to corner, which means I need to remove material from this side and this side. So let's flip it over. And with this, I am going to work diagonally, corner to corner, and get rid of those high points. So I'm going for a very light cut when I'm doing this. And be aware when you're doing this, that if the plane stops cutting corner to corner, that means that what you've done is you've created a little dip. So you're going to have to work sideways, remove material from there, and then the other side, remove material from there, and then you should be able to take some from the middle again. And I'll finish up by doing a few long strokes. Okay, and let's check that. Still awful. Let's keep going. getting quite close now, very close. So now that I'm getting close, what I'm going to do is just put the plane over it like this and just rest it on its side, tilt it right over, and then what you'll be able to see, there's one, you see that little bit of light peeking out on the bottom right there? You can use your plane as a straight edge in order to see where you might need to remove material from. And you do need to tilt it over quite a bit in order to see this. If you hold it back like this, then you can't really see that light peeking through. So tilt it right over till you get a proper shadow, and then you can see it kind of rocking. And flattening this lid can be really, really challenging. What you need to do is get in the mindset of create an image of what is going on with this lid in your head, and just sort of picture where those peaks are, where it's sort of dropping off, how that twist is happening, and then work out why that is causing the lid to rock. So at the moment, after checking this all over with a plane, I can see that what I've got is a pretty level surface going along here and along here. This whole area is pretty flat along the entire thing. But what I've got now is a sort of ramp going off either side like that. Yeah, like if I do that, that plane is quite obviously tilting, and it is pretty much along that line that I've just drawn. This one here, it's kind of dropping off a little bit further out like that. So what that means is when I flip this over and put it flat, if I put all my pressure in the middle, then this lid doesn't rock. It only rocks now if I push right out in the corners where it's slightly dropping off. If I'm pushing on the opposite side and it's within this area, it's pretty good. So that means that when I flatten this off, I can't just work in the center now. I really need to spread this plane out and get it working corner to corner this way and all the way out here. Perhaps even go across this diagonal, but be careful not to hit that corner and that corner. Instead, maybe drop it on sort of here and lift it off there, like that. And just work on getting that sort of flat plateau off and then bring it down level with these two corners here. Now I will just stress, that is how I'm reading this lid in particular. The one that you do, the lid that you make, may be completely different to that. It's up to you to be able to read that using the edge of your plane, using a straight edge if you have it, and just work out where it's dropping off, where it's flat, and where you need to remove that material from. There isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution, unfortunately. Okay, so I've been working diagonally now for some time, and the area in which it's dropping off from the edge is very minimal. I've got just a little bit more to do there by the looks of it. Now, because I've been working diagonally and I've actually been skewing my plane so that it is properly cutting across the grain, which is a very good way of removing material. It's quite quick and it sort of has a little bit less resistance as well. But because I've been going diagonal, it's made the finish suffer. So what I'm going to do now that there's a tiny bit of drop off here and a tiny bit of drop off, I'm going to start going with the grain, and just be careful not to sort of nod the plane down and take off that back corner, or tilt it back and take off this front corner. So as I'm going through like this, pressure all on top, and then as I get towards that area that's dropped off, sort of release the pressure on the front and let it level out the rest of it. There we go. So then on this back corner, lots of pressure on that, because that's still a high point technically, but being careful not to put too much pressure on this front corner. Lovely. So as you can see, it's a fair bit of work to get to this stage of making the bottom of that flat. Just keep in mind what I said. Get a picture of what's happening with this board in your head. Is it flat on top? Is it dipping off at the sides? Okay, if I take material corner to corner, then that is actually going to be creating a trough, which means that actually it might make this side high and this side high. So then you might need to take a bit of material from here in order to make that drop down a bit more. There's so much that can go on with it, and having a mental picture of what can go on, I'm going to keep saying it, having a mental picture of what is going on here will really, really help you. The other thing is make sure you're taking fine shavings with it. If you're taking heavy shavings with it, then firstly, you increase the risk of tear out and thus damaging this board you're working on, and you're going to have to work down even further in order to get rid of that tear out. It's going to make the job a lot harder because you're pushing a lot more, probably going to get more frustrated, and the key with this is patience. Take off small, precise bits at a time. Make sure your plane's sharp, make sure it's well set up, and despite this being a somewhat long and tedious task, it actually can be quite enjoyable. Another thing to bear in mind with this lid is if it was particularly twisted or rocking all over the place, much like mine was before I flattened it off, bear in mind that in order to get that flat, you're going to have to take off quite a lot of material, which means that this lid may end up slightly thinner than you intended. So it's up to you to make a judgment. If it comes out the clamps and it's rocking all over the place and you think, I actually want a relatively thick lid, you might have to remake it. In which case, just cut down these joins that you've glued, replane them, and then stick it back together, and who knows, maybe it might be slightly better next time. However, if you're not too worried about it rocking and you're happy to flatten it off and you know that it may be a little bit thin, then as you can see, it is totally possible to flatten it off and get rid of that twist. Now, what we're going to do is thickness this lid so that the top is somewhat parallel with the bottom surface. Now, bear in mind that the bottom is going to be sitting on top of the box. That is the area that needs to be flat in order to stop it rocking. The top isn't going to be resting on anything. So if that has a few bumps on it, if it drops off on one corner, it's not the end of the world. As long as it looks somewhat parallel along all of these edges, that's the main thing that we're going for with the thicknessing. So the thicknessing is somewhat of an easier stage. So in order to thickness the lid, you're going to need to get a marking gauge, and what you're going to have to do is find the thinnest part of the lid, referencing the marking gauge on this bottom flat surface. So find the thinnest part, which looks to be around sort of there, and I'm going to set it to just below that thickness. You can set it to be bang on if you want, but just below gives you a line to actually work to here. So I'll just double check it on all the other corners, make sure that is in fact the lowest point, which it is. So marking gauge is set to the thinnest section, and what I'm going to do is scratch this round all four sides, referencing the marking gauge off the bottom of the lid, across the end grain, and there we go. And what that's done is left me a very precise marking gauge line around all four edges that is the same offset from that bottom surface. And now it's just a case of working down to all those lines with the plane in order to create a thicknessed lid. Now, the method that I prefer to use here is work down to the line on all the edges first. So what I'll do is tilt the plane slightly and take it down here, take it down here, take it down there, and take it down here. And then what that leaves you with is obviously a hill in the middle of this lid, and you've just got to plane down that sort of bump without touching any of those corners that are bang on the money. It tends to be a quicker and easier way of working down the lines rather than take it all down evenly, because if you do that, it just means that you've constantly got to chase the high spots and get rid of them, and like it just adds difficulty to it. I would get down to the line on all four edges and then remove the bump in the middle. Simple. So I'll do this closest edge first. I am going to make a slightly heavier cut with the plane so that I can get the job done quicker. As you do it, just keep an eye on that line on the side. Make sure you're getting down to it evenly. Nearly there. Okay, so I've hit it on the back here. And what I'm feeling for here is a little wispy bit of material, which means that I'm bang on that line. And here you go, you can kind of see that wispy material here. That's the material just breaking off above the marking gauge line, and it shows that you're exactly where you want to be. You may also see that a thin white line is produced on the edge as well, which is the burnished material left over from the marking gauge, and obviously it's just been exposed after breaking off that wispy bit. So if you see that very fine white line along the edge, then that's probably the marking gauge line that you're aiming for. So now I'm going to be working on this front edge, and I don't really want to cause any tear out on here, so I'm going to angle the plane sort of off the edge of the material, so then the skewed cut kind of pushes the material off, and as it gets sloped down, I'm still working with the grain. If you slope it into the material like that, and eventually the plane starts tilting, which it will do as we work down to that line, you're sort of going against the fibers which are climbing down then, because you're planing up into them, and it might cause a little bit of tear out. So tilt it away from the surface And again, just looking to get down to that line. So I can see the white line on all the edges. It's a lot quicker when going across the grain, I do warn you. So you can see that what I've produced here is kind of a raised panel looking thing, but now all you got to do, clamp it in there, clamp it up, and just get rid of that material in the middle until it's at the same level as all of these outside edges. Okay, and just so I don't get confused, that is the top. There you go. If I flip this over, I can see that it's rocking side to side and also front to back, corner to corner, corner to corner. So that means that what I've got in here is still a slight hill or a bump or whatever you want to call it going on. It's not the end of the world. As I said, with the top, nothing is sitting on there, so you don't need to get it perfectly flat. But of course, if that bugs you, then you can just quickly skim over this sort of middle surface a bit, get rid of that bump and get it so all of these corners are sitting nice and flat. I'm going to do it just a little bit more, but I'm not going to get too anal about it. That's better. Little bit of a rock going on, but that is nowhere near as bad as it was before. Cool. So now that that is sitting flat, it's time to get it fitted within the lid of the box. So what you're going to need for this is get your trusty shooting board out again. God, this thing's so heavy. You're going to need your shooting board for this. So before we start just going ahead and shooting this down to size, what we're going to need to do is find an edge that we want to be the reference, and ideally that will be an edge that isn't rocking, sitting nice and flat, and will be a good surface to put against that fence. And it's looking like that edge is pretty good. So I'm going to put a V pointing towards that edge and on the opposite side to the same edge. And it's kind of like doing a face side and face edge, I guess. Now with this, really important that that V is always pressed against the fence. If you flip it over and have the opposite face against the fence, then you risk cutting the lid to something of this sort of shape. If I have that as my V side and then this is my V side, should we say the face edge, whatever. If you plane this edge with the V up against the fence, you're going to get that nice and square. And if we check that, ignore the splintering, that'd be lovely. But then if you flip it around like this and do that other edge, yep, you're going to get that nice and square. But as you can see, it's not pressing against the V edge. Thus, it's still square, but you've got that sort of shape going on. However, if I was to reference off that V, so this was the original one I did, like that, and get this edge nice and square, flip it over, so then the V is still pressing against the fence, you can see that it's then going to square off this edge. I'm not going to take off that much material because I can't be bothered, but there we go, it's going to square off that, which will mean that these two edges are now parallel, and then we can set a marking gauge or something to reference on this edge and draw a parallel line all the way along, and therefore give us some sort of rectangle thing going on, rather than this, I don't even know what that shape's called. Now obviously this is a very exaggerated view, but it's something worth keeping in mind when making this lid. You want to make sure that it's nice and square and parallel. So I'm going to flush down this edge so that it's nice and square. There we go. And then I'll get the box and just check how we're doing. So you see I haven't really got too much material to remove. So I'm going to keep this box nice and close so I can constantly check on it. Make sure that the V is pressed against the fence and take down this opposite side until it fits. Very nearly there. Oh, quite snug. It's just about attached. I reckon one skim. Oh, very close. Very close indeed. Maybe two. Oh, not bad. Not bad. And it's important that you get that nice and snug in there, because this is now going to be your reference as to where to cut down this excess material in order to make that flush with the edge of the box. Firstly, I'm just going to double check if it fits better one way more than the other. Seems to be exactly the same. And looking at the lid, I've got that little defect on the edge there, which I wanted to get rid of. So I'll do a tiny overhang on this side and then chop off the majority on this side. Flip it over, and with a very sharp pencil, I'm going to draw a line right up into that corner and on this corner as well. And just make sure I know which bit I'm cutting off. And before I remove that, I'm going to make sure that I've got a little V mark or something on the box so that I know that that edge lines up with this side of the box. If you've made the box square, it won't really matter which side you draw this mark on. The lid should fit both ways like it does here. But if it's slightly out, then your lid might fit better one way more than the other. And trust me, fitting this lid is one of the minor difficulties you will face if you're trying to fit it into an out of square box. You wait until you move on to the miters later in the project. That's where it becomes difficult. So if you're watching this entire project ahead of time before actually making it, please ensure that you've made that box square. It will help you out so much. So now I've lined up those two marks, so I know that this is in the same place as it was before, and we're going to plane the lid flush. Now it's worth noting that when I cut to these lines, I cut it about 1 millimeter oversized, so I've got a little bit of material to remove. So we're going to clamp that in the vise, not too much pressure, just make sure it's enough to hold it in there securely, and with a very fine cut, take it down to the width of the box. Now once again, it's worth going just to halfway on this lid and then come from the other side and work to halfway, because again, you don't want to catch that end grain there and cause breakout. Not at this stage. When flipping it over, be careful not to let that move on the bottom. So if it slips down, then you're probably going to make this lid too small. And then, as nice as it is having a perfect fit in the lid, like that, you know, when you're making it, that's lovely. But when it comes to actually using the box, if you're taking off that lid and it's kind of sticking, it's not the nicest thing in the world. So what we'll do is a final skim of one of these edges and get it so it's fitting with zero side to side movement at all in the box, but also easy enough to lift off. So still got the V there, push that against the fence. Let's take one skim, see what that does. Yeah, a bit more. Nope. Lovely. So that is fitting really nicely in there, but it comes straight off, and that is what you want. That is the fit we're going for. And there you go. That is how you size and flatten the lid to fit within the top of the box. Now, we are going to be cutting rebates on this lid in the next video in order to locate that front to back movement. The lid is not going to stay loose like this. So you'll be seeing that in the next episode, as well as planing down these top edges so they're flush with the top of the box. I will be putting a lot of supporting resources in the description, which will help you with sharpening a plane, setting up a plane, how to flatten material. I did a complete other series on that process. So if you're really struggling with getting that initial surface flat on the lid, then that video, and in fact that series, will be incredibly useful to you. So links to all that will be in the description, and you are now ready to move on to the next video, which you can do so by clicking the link below. And if you haven't already, please press the big round subscribe button to the left hand side of the video. I will see you in the next one.